Take two. They're small.
I was going to chime in there. Okay, let me find our questions for today.
What's happening, wife? How much of the front are we going to edit out?
I don't know.
We still haven't come up with a new name for the podcast.
Yeah. Names are hard.
Names are hard.
Names are really hard.
One of our kids didn't have a name for almost a day.
Yeah. That's all I got to say about that.
Super high energy around here, folks. Yeah. Glad you tuned in.
Just got out of jiu-jitsu and...
Cross-eyed bottom was a harsh mistress today.
Yeah.
You're getting good, though. You got out a time or two.
I got...
I think you peed on the person and then they let you up, but,
yeah.
you know, yeah.
Where do you come up with these things? All right, we'll just jump right into our first question.
Let's do that.
This question is about weights while fasting from Ashley. Hey, Rob, first of all, just want to say thanks for all the hard work you do to get a healthy living message out to the world. I loved your book, Wired to Eat, and I just purchased the Keto Masterclass a few days ago. I'm excited to learn more. I have a question about lifting weights while in a fasted state, especially for a non-athlete. I'm fortunate enough to have a really nice gym at my office, and what seems best for me is to use my lunch hour to exercise, usually around 11 a.m., and I'm far from what anyone would consider an athlete, but I've always enjoyed incorporating lifting weights into my exercise routines, which have been very sporadic over the years. I probably average 2 times a week of lifting, but when I do, I try to push myself and lift heavy. Do you recommend I do this in a fasted state? What about taking branched chain amino acids beforehand? I see these marketed mainly toward athletes. Thing is, I do have a lot of fat to lose, so should I even be concerned with lifting right now? Should I focus more on HIIT type of cardio? Also, I want to start incorporating alternate days of fasting. What type of exercise would you recommend on days that I fast all day? Thanks so much for your insights.
Man, there's a lot going on there. So, Ashley, I'm assuming that you're eating breakfast, given that you're saying that you're training at 11 a.m. So I've learned a lot from Tyler and Luis with Keto Gains, and we've actually had some very nice studies done where they look at both the muscle gain and the fat loss in a fasted versus non-fasted state. And I could make the case that if one is an endurance athlete, there's maybe an argument for doing some fasted training. Like it enhances lipolysis and fat mobilization, and you could use it as kind of a block of your periodization. But interestingly, if the individual is fed a bit, you burn more total calories. You have higher total intensity. And so in general, we get better results actually having a little bit of food in the tank than not. And Ashley, this is one of these things that is a red herring. I'm kind of blanking on that. My side control bottom was also spicy today. We have some very big dudes at the gym, but there's this tendency for women to eschew weights in favor of cardio. Mm-hmm. And there's also this tendency for women to do only lower body training and not adequate upper body training. I don't know.
I like doing legs.
You do like doing legs, but you have a body above your torso, also above your hip line. So, man, again, there's just so much stuff going on here. Our exercise should be about making our life better, not necessarily for fat loss or body composition. Other than I could make the case that virtually anybody would benefit from carrying 5 pounds more muscle when you think about like, the way that we look, the way that we feel, effective aging, all that type of stuff. Like unless you're...
And it's a hedge against disease.
It's a hedge against disease, yeah. So think about exercise as the thing that allows you to do the other stuff that you should be doing, not as a place that we're necessarily burning calories. It takes an enormous amount of exercise to burn even a paltry amount of calories, and with a little nutrition foible, you can undo that whole thing.
Right.
Like nuts are great, but man, it's so easy to overdo your caloric content with nuts, and particularly Blue Diamond Smokehouse salted almonds, which I've been known to sit down and eat like a cup of them back to back, which is like 1,000 calories right there. So
Well, she says she enjoys lifting weights. So this is
lift weights as often as you can.
But I guess her main question is, does she do it in a fasted state?
I wouldn't recommend a fasted state. I would recommend a little bit of food, and the fact that so I'm assuming that maybe you're eating breakfast at 7 or 8 a.m. and then 11 a.m. is actually a perfect, you're kind of semi-fasted, but you're not like fasted. The branched chain amino acids are virtually worthless. Tyler and Louise have just bludgeoned me with that. They've really dug into the literature. It's a waste of money, waste of time. Kind of ideal circumstance would be have breakfast around like 7 or 8. You train around like 11, which is what you're doing. And then do a meal half hour, 45 minutes after that, if you can fit that in. That would be ideal. Lift weights as many days as you can. Mm-hmm. If you want to do some HIIT, go for some high intensity interval training. But, again, I look at that as you either like it or it's facilitating something you want to do. This is not the stuff that's going to mainly help you lose weight. Being on point with your diet, being dialed in on your sleep, those things will help you affect the body composition change.
So she's asking also about alternate days of fasting, and I know you always go back to like, what is your goal? Like, why do you want to do this? And then what type of exercise on a day that she would do an all-day fast.
Yeah, so I'm glad you picked up on that. Ashley, I would just ask you, why do you want to do the alternate days of fasting versus dial in a solid ketogenic diet from either Keto Gains or the Keto Masterclass? I'm so impressed with what sound, consistent training and nutrition do, and I'm so unimpressed with these kind of like stopgap measures like fasting. And I wrote my first article on intermittent fasting back in 2005, but by 2006 I was pumping the brakes and kind of backpedaling on it. And now the interwebs are full of stories of people who relate their N=1 experience, that they just couldn't make progress. They just couldn't lean out. They just couldn't lose those last inches or, make it over the hump until they started doing intermittent fasting. And the internet is equally full of people that they were motoring along well, they were making progress, and then the fasting was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was just too much. It kind of pushed them into like an overreaching, overtraining kind of scenario. So I just, as time has gone on, I would love to see something like a time-restricted eating schedule. So you eat between like 8 and 4, 8 and 5, 2 or 3 meals a day. Time that around your training appropriately. I've just grown really unimpressed with, I guess, the cost-benefit analysis with intermittent fasting. And again, some people it's appropriate, but when we look at good exercise and getting out and playing and being active and fueling appropriately, maybe every once in a while dropping in a little bit of fasting just to if nothing else, prove to yourself that you could do it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm hesitant on that stuff.
Well, yeah. if building lean muscle mass is part of your goal, then
which it should be,
alternate days of fasting
is
not going to
lead you down the definitely working against that path, because the initial block of fasting is when we tend to lose the most muscle mass, and then it kind of, even under a ketogenic state, we kind of lose a disproportionate amount of lean body mass in that scenario. If you are training on a fasted day, I would do a full body strength training session. Doesn't have to be super hard, but one of the things that will mitigate the loss of lean body mass is resistance training. So yeah, I don't know, man. I would like to see 3 or 4 days a week of smart lifting, a appropriately set up a ketogenic diet with appropriate protein, about 0.8 to 1.0 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. Get after those big main lifts, hit them in different ways 3 to 4 days a week.
Get out in the sun.
Get out in the sun, play like that.
Just sleep.
Do some jujitsu. Do some jujitsu. Yeah, so yeah. I know we kind of beat that one to death, but yeah.
Alrighty. Our next question is from Tara. She says, keto treats are causing mischief. Rob, I've been a fan for many, many years, and I just purchased the Keto Masterclass about a month ago. It's been phenomenal. I've totally stalled on the macros chapter, avoiding it at all costs. I know I have to get into it, but it brings me back to some dark bodybuilding days of yore when I measured and weighed my food. It became obsessive and caused some issues that I'm scared to have come back. But that's not why I write, although if you want to address that, I'm down. A sneaky way to get into questions. I'm writing because in one of the recent Q&A podcasts you guys did, you mentioned so-called safe sweeteners like erythritol or stevia possibly raising insulin but not raising glucose. Could you explain that a bit further for us laymen in the crowd? What is the mechanism for that and how does it play out? I was doing well on ketosis, although it took me months to become fat adapted. Then I started making a keto treat here and there that turned into outright insane, nonstop binging type behavior that left me bloated, gassy, kicked out of ketosis, riddled with inflammation, and having intense cravings. So I made more keto treats and my weight all piled back on. It felt like when I used to go bonkers on paleo treats. I've been told these sugar subs don't cause this effect, but I'm not buying it. Rob, what is wrong with me? I grew up munching on antibiotics and spent 5 years of my life on tetracycline as a teenager. Maybe I'm just damaged goods that can't deal with this stuff like ever. Looking forward to hearing your answer. All the best, Tara.
Oh man, lots of good stuff in here. So, you know, on the weighing and measuring side, this was something that got us kicked out of CrossFit in part because when we were running our gym, we started people with like a basic like seat of the pants paleo, like have a palm-sized hunk of protein, do lots of veggies, have a little fruit, maybe a little sweet potato, but it was all pretty seat of the pants, and people made good progress. But I wouldn't say that they got down to like super lean body composition with that approach. Like they would, if they were significantly overweight, they could lose a lot of weight. But then if you wanted abs and whatnot, you had to dial things up. What was cool about the combination of CrossFit and a seat of your pants paleo is that the females we had no eating disorder stuff at all. And even people commented, hey, I used to have some binge and purge stuff. I used to have some eating, some disordered eating. And that didn't cause anything in these folks. But then out of diligence, because CrossFit was more of a fan of the zone, we started recommending the zone. And we didn't have a ton of folks say this, but a number of people said, hey, the scrutiny that comes about from weighing and measuring my food is producing these kind of neurotic behaviors for me. So I think that that's just something to be mindful of. In an ideal world, weighing and measuring food could be something that we use for a week or two. And the way that we recommend doing it is like usually you have 4, maybe 5 protein sources that you use routinely, a couple of fat sources, and you just get to where you can eyeball and you're like, okay, that's about 4 to 6 ounces of meat or chicken or, you know, whatever. And so it just provides kind of a baseline so that you can, again, like people get really good at baselining. You don't have to do it
every single day, like especially if you know that this is a thing for you. Like just, you know, do it for the first week so you have a really good sense of, you know, what does that look like with regards to protein and fat and the carbs for you for according to your macros. And then
I would kick the tires on potentially doing it. If you know in your gut that you're like, this is going to be crazyville for me, then just do kind of seat of the pants and just go like palm-sized hunk of protein, or just make sure you only weigh your protein as a starter. Just like weigh the protein and then like just do tons of veggies. Nuts and stuff like that do need to get measured and put in like a Ziploc bag because we can really overdo those quite easily. But that kind of takes the pressure off because then you're not weighing and measuring every single food and all that type of stuff. So I would recommend either just have a conversation with yourself and are you cool with weighing and measuring for a week so that you can establish a baseline, and then you put the food scale away, put the measuring cups away, because you can default to just kind of eyeballing, or just go seat of the pants and follow some of those other guidelines. So on the like non-nutritive sweeteners, safe sweeteners, it's pretty anecdotal, but what I've noticed, even just with our kids, if they do something that has legit sugar, like real ice cream, we'll give them a bowl, they'll eat the bowl, they'll be like, can I have another one?
Some more, yeah.
And occasionally we'll give them the next one, and then they're like, can I have another one? And then we use some things like the Mammoth Creamery ice cream. And as a baseline, it's maybe a little bit not sweet enough. We actually add a little bit of Truvia to it, which is some stevia mix. And it makes it really sweet. It tastes like indistinguishable from regular ice cream. But what's really interesting for the girls, they have a bowl and they're like, Dada, that was really good. But then they're done. And so I think that there's a gradation on this stuff where the mix of hyper-palatable foods or more palatable foods that do have legitimate carb-fat combos, I think are the most problematic to deal with. And then if we have a more palatable food, but it's mainly just fat. So like we're using stevia. For some people, it may be a problem. Like it may kick folks over. We noticed that diet soda, like people that had had some, you know, they had been overweight a long time, like a diet soda would kick them over and they would want to start eating more food. There are some people that you show them a picture of like a dessert and they get an insulin dump, and it's different than the insulin hypothesis view of this whole thing, which is you release insulin, you store fat, and you're done. The way that I look at this is you release insulin, your blood sugar drops, your body wants to compensate for that blood sugar drop, so you get hungry. So I look at this more from the neuroregulation of appetite perspective than like the kind of insulin hypothesis perspective. And there is just kind of a reality that most of these keto and paleo treats tend to be really nutrient dense or calorie dense. There was something in Costco I looked at the other day. There were these little rabbit pellet looking things. They didn't look super good, but they were like coconut oil, stevia, and a couple other things. And I was just looking at them. I'm like, oh my God, those look good. You know, and I didn't buy them because I would have just like killed the whole thing, because I was just kind of shaking it and I was imagining like the mouth feel and the little crunch and everything. I'm like, oh, this would be a disaster. So we do some of the, what's the brand of chocolate? Lily's? Yeah, Lily's is a stevia sweetened chocolate. We do some of those, and you know, it's interesting even with that. We'll do the 85% dark chocolate that's stevia sweetened, tastes great. But then we'll do
the one with sea salt and
almonds, and we will eat that whole fucking thing. Like we will stand right there, and like I'll eat a strip, Nikki will eat a strip, and we'll plow through the whole thing. So I would say that one, because of the almonds
and
the salt, clicks over into hyperpalatable, because we never eat. We'll have a strip of like the plain 85%. I'll have one, you'll have one, and it'll take us 2 days to eat a bar. Whereas like, we just had lunch and we just ate a whole bar of the almond and sea salt. So, you know, it's tough because you want to be able to lay out like strict lane lines. You know, do this, don't do that. But I think that there's a reality that there's just a spectrum in this stuff, and so you seem to know what the triggers are and what's going to make things kind of go sideways for you. So you may need to really steer clear of the keto and paleo treats. Maybe you have them once a week. Maybe it's after a workout day or something. I really hate looking at this stuff as a reward. That just sets stuff up for problems, because then we get kind of that emotional attachment between, you know, around like I deserve this and everything. It's dodgy. And then it may just be kind of a reality that you just don't do those for a good period of time.
Or don't make them so that you have them in the house. Like if you can make them and bring them to a friend's house and leave the rest of them there. Like the hard thing with having stuff in the house is that they're, you know, you make them and it's 2 dozen and then you just want to keep having them. Whereas if you were able to either give most of them away, or you're able to have like the 1 or 2 and satisfy that little, you know, hankering for something like that, but then you're not tempted to go.
Yeah, and you know, going back to like the Lily's bars, if they're on sale, we'll buy like 6 of the 85% plain dark chocolate, because we're like, okay, that's cool. We're getting a bargain on them and we're not going to eat them all at once. But like we only buy 2 of the almond at a time, to dead stop, because otherwise we'll just eat all of them. And again, I don't want to belabor that one. But
you said this back in the paleo solution, like just don't keep it in the house.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like if, you know,
and when you
back then, it's like if you want ice cream, go out and get a scoop of ice cream at the ice cream shop and then come home. But if you bring the gallon of ice cream home into your house, you're going to end up like
you're going to eat the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question is from Mark on body fat and weight reset. Dear Robb and Nicki, I was reading an old podcast of Chris Kresser. He was talking about the body fat reset or body weight reset. I think the title was why so hard to lose weight and keep it off. After listening to this, I was wondering if there was anything new that could shed more light on how I could truly reset my body weight from where it likes to be at 300 to where it should be at 200. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Truly, what you do has helped so much. You can't know how much. Thank you.
Awesome. Good to hear. Usually the term applied to this is body weight set point.
Okay.
And what the literature suggests is that, and this is true, like people trying to gain weight, like gain muscle mass, you've got to work. And let's say a skinny dude like me gains 10 pounds of muscle. You've got to really stay on top of that, and you need to maintain that for 6 months or a year before the body is kind of like, okay, this is the new normal. If you gain the 10 pounds of muscle and then you go on vacation and you don't train and your diet kind of goes, you consume fewer calories, you will lose that muscle mass. And the flip side of this is that if you're trying to lose body weight, it's about 6 months to a year, and probably closer to that year point before your body says, okay, this is kind of my new normal. And it has to do with hypothalamic regulation, appetite regulation, leptin, ghrelin, like all of those things play into this. And it just takes a while to entrain the body to be at that new set point.
Okay. So a year.
I would gun for a year. Like
so
try to hit it and understand that you're gonna. It's going to be a non-linear process. You're going to make some forward progress, then you may backslide a little bit, and then you tighten things up and make some more forward progress. You may end up bifurcating this, and you say, okay, I'm going to make 250 my new normal, and then you maintain there for a while, and then but it depends. Like some people, they rock it down, but then they need to work for a while to maintain that new spot, and it's easy comparatively to backslide and regain the body weight. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, our next question is from Sandy on healing the gut after Giardia. Rob, I believe you've mentioned at sometime in the past you tested positive for Giardia. I just found out today that I did as well. After treatment, how did you rebuild your microbiome?
Man, you know, the rebuilding the microbiome is a tough thing to answer. Maybe we can... we're going to do a podcast with Mike Ruscio. Like I mentioned to you guys that we're mainly shifting to Q&A, but Ruscio, I think I mentioned last time, like he's just provided such enormous value to people that it's one of these folks that I feel inclined to go back to again and again, because he's really Johnny on the spot with this stuff. Instead of looking at microbiome, I would look more at functionality. Like, how are you feeling? What are your stools like? Do you have any lingering signs and symptoms of dysbiosis? And then we have to get in and start addressing that. Some people do great with probiotics in general. Some people do horribly. Like folks that have histamine intolerance tend to do poorly with the standard probiotic formulations, but yet these people may do very well with a fecal transplant. And again, there's just like huge variation in this story, but I would just kind of keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully you didn't get totally crushed by the Giardia. It's interesting. The studies that I've looked at on this is, you know, one round of antimicrobials, antibiotics, it changes the gut microbiota forever effectively. We don't really know what that means. You know, people kind of freak out about it. It's particularly problematic with kids because you're like, oh, did they start with pristine gut microbiota and then it changes after a round of antibiotics? We just don't know. But this is where I think looking at kind of clinical manifestations, like again, some people do great with prebiotic fiber and that seems to make things better. I think we have some questions here. Actually, the next one on green leafy vegetables. Other people, it doesn't work for them at all and exacerbates problems. So I think you just kind of have to look at it more on a clinical outcome basis. Like, are your poos formed, or are on the flip side of that, are you constipated? Are you kind of showing signs and symptoms of kind of gut dysbiosis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? You know, these irritable bowel syndrome type things. And if you do, that's when we need to get in and start peeling the onion and figuring out how to deal with that. But I would be nervous about recommending anything absent knowing what's going on, because the one thing that I'm fairly confident with, and again, I got most of this data from Dr. Ruscio, in the clinical trials that have been done on prebiotic administration, about 50% of people get better, about 50% of people get worse. And so it's really a highly individual process. And then even within that, some people do great on like VSL3, which is a particular probiotic strain that has shown some efficacy for ulcerative colitis and post C. difficile infection. But then other people have problems with it. So it's just a big thing. But again, figure out a baseline, see how you're doing. And then if there's problems, then we need to get in and start trying to triage and figure out what's going on. Dr. Ruscio's book, Healthy Gut, Healthy You, is a fantastic resource. And for a print book, it is so powerful in that it provides kind of a logic tree. Okay, you are here, you're experiencing this, do this thing. If ABC happens, then it kind of leads you to the next step and the next step. Yeah.
Right. All right. Our next question is from Ryan on leafy green vegetables. He says, on a recent version of the Paleo Solution podcast, Rob, you mentioned that you didn't do well with leafy greens. This kind of blew me away, as I just assumed that leafy green vegetables were universally great for you. This got me thinking about my own N=1 experiences, which is normally after about 2 hours after eating a salad for lunch, I have pretty loose stool. I had been associating it with keto and or the electrolyte elixir, but now I'm thinking it may be the leafy greens. I will be doing a series of N=1 experiments to try to nail this down, but I wonder if Rob could share some links to additional information on this or cover in more detail on the podcast why leafy greens may not be universally good for everyone.
Oh, man. This is one of these funny things that... So when I went paleo dealing with my ulcerative colitis, things improved dramatically. But I was still always kind of on the loose side. And I just assumed that that was kind of my new normal, which it was given what the inputs were. But every once in a while, I would notice that things were better. And it was when I hadn't really eaten much in the way of greens. But that was craziness. That was madness. You get antioxidants, you get fiber, you get, vitamins and minerals and micronutrients and all this stuff. And then carnivore happened. And these people who have horrible gut problems, horrible autoimmune conditions, started making these really remarkable improvements in their health by completely or largely removing plant materials, in particular green, fibrous, twiggy type stuff. And ironically, like just a ton of people have kind of commented that they may do well with, so we'll assume the protein is kind of like the freebie, and they're even within that, there's a spectrum of what people do well with. Some people have to stick 100% with like beef and lamb, no chicken, no pork. So there's variation within that, but then some sort of starchy tuber like potatoes or yucca or something like that they do okay with, maybe even white rice. Higher glycemic load fruits like mango and papaya, pineapple, bananas, these things that we're told don't eat because it raises blood sugar really rapidly, which in a lot of people it does. But it was interesting that these things that just on the surface you would generally make the case that they're easier to digest, people were doing better with. And then things like a salad, they were just getting crushed by it. And so it's still one of these things that I feel like a little bit of a crazy person myself, because we're wanting to recommend balanced nutrition and everything, but balance it's a term with no meaning. Like, it's all context driven. So like Michaela Peterson just figured out that she has Lyme disease. And is that the totality of what her issues are? Is that something that's been layered on later? It would suggest potentially that she had Lyme exposure when she was 2, which is when she developed rheumatoid arthritis first. Like, I haven't been able to talk to her. Maybe we'll get her back on the podcast to talk about some of that stuff. But the reality is that on a clinical outcome side, removing plants for the most part has been really beneficial for her. And so that's kind of where we have to hang our hats. And I think so long as, well, even I was going to say, you want to eat a lot of offal, liver and everything. There are people who don't do it and they motor along just fine. This is, again, Michaela Peterson's blood work. If you guys missed that, we had her on the podcast and we went through advanced testing that we do in our clinic looking at lipoproteins. Hers look great. Not everybody's does. Mm-hmm. I did a little experiment for about 4 weeks before I pulled the plug on carnivore, and like my lipoproteins went from like 1100 to 2600. There's still a question as to whether or not that is in total a net negative with regards to atherogenic potential, but it's a worrisome. Like, it would be nice if my blood work just looked great and all that stuff, but it didn't, and I didn't feel well, and I was kind of crazy and neurotic while doing it. But yeah, Ryan, it's interesting, and I think that this is something that we just kind of have to lean back and let the clinical outcomes kind of drive this thing.
And you do better with things like broccoli that's cooked versus like
Very
salad
well. Yeah.
or just like raw greens.
Well, and Nikki's been getting in and doing one of our good friends, Jackie. She's actually the CEO of the risk assessment program. She did a salad dressing.
Super easy salad dressing. It sounds so basic, but it's basically like 3 parts olive oil,
1 part.
1 part apple cider vinegar, ton of salt. Like, I feel like I put in like a tablespoon of salt.
Some garlic optional.
And some garlic. And by 3 parts, probably like...
Well, you could do 3/4 cup.
3/4 cup,
Yep.
and then 1/4 cup of the apple cider vinegar, and just shake it up. And we've been dressing our salads with that. The girls really, really like it. And
But what I've noticed is if Nikki dresses the salad maybe an hour in advance, and then we put a lid on it, and I keep shaking it and mixing it and everything, the vinegar kind of breaks down the greens. Like and you can cook things with acid. Like this is what ceviche is,
yeah.
So acid cooking is a viable option. If I have a little bit of hypochlorhydria, a little bit of low stomach acid, it may be helping in that regard. So there's lots of layers to this, but cooking the plant matter definitely helps things for me. But even then, if I go above a certain threshold in eating veggies, like the next day I'm a little on the loose side. And I've talked about the Imodium and kind of the benefit that I've had. Maybe next podcast we'll do an all Imodium all the way around, because we've had a lot of questions on like the 10 and 2 on Instagram and stuff like that. So maybe we do an all Imodium episode where I try to dig into what the mechanism is, why you might want to try it, some caveats. I did just get back from the Henry Aiken's Hidden Jiu-Jitsu camp down in Costa Rica, and there was a guy there, Sean, who's a hospitalist at a place back east, and he's been recommending this for the better part of 10 years. He's lost like 100 pounds on keto, and somewhere along the line, people with IBS, he started recommending Imodium for these folks on a long-term basis, 2 to 6 milligrams in the morning for the most part, and just being wary of anything that looks like a C. diff infection or a hemolytic E. coli infection, which is basically like you've got stuff coming out of both ends. You maybe have some blood with it. Then you absolutely do not want to use Imodium. You don't want to lock that stuff in there. You want the body to purge and right. do all that stuff. So yeah, but absent or Giardia, like one of the right. previous questions. So yeah, it's interesting, but I think again, if our digestion is good things seem to just happen as a consequence. And if good digestion means you don't do a massive amount of fiber, I think that's maybe a place to go. Is that the ultimate ancestral norm for humans? Maybe not, but this is where, antibiotics, multi-generational antibiotic exposure, stress, I don't know, all kinds of different things can play into this. But I think that what's interesting is if we can tweak variables such that we get better clinical outcomes, like our poo is better and we generally feel better, I think that everything else is going in a good direction. Cool.
Sounds good. Actually, one thing following up on here, because he says that he wasn't sure if he'd associate this with keto or electrolytes. So I guess one question is, have you noticed this in the past when you've had salads, like before keto?
Good question.
Like, has this been a thing throughout your life, or if it's just recently after you've started keto and supplementing with electrolytes, then that it could be, because some people who do go aggressive with electrolytes out of the gate can have
yep.
loose stools.
Particularly if you're using like a magnesium citrate form, which is, if you're going to supplement with magnesium, I would recommend like a glycinate, malate, almost any of the other forms besides citrate. Citrate is literally cataloged within like pharmacology as a laxative. So the absorption that we get from it is pretty low. The amount of water that's pulled into the stool is super high. So if we were to look at anywhere at a problem related to electrolytes, it would be the magnesium form, in my opinion.
Okay.
Awesome, wife. Thank you.
Questions for this week.
Cool. Awesome.
Right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
folks.
guys.
Take care.